back to my room, clutching my jar of moonshine. There you go. Thank you.
Do we have any questions? Could you stand, please?
Matthew, question. Do you want to go ahead and tell us what you did about getting around, having missed the entire performance of the play? Do you want us to wait and read it in the book? Can you work it into a story here?
Well, I suppose the story that it became was the story of a realization that how much I envied people who had faith. That when I was down there, I mean, the book is very funny, as you can tell, and so on, but I met people down in Dayton who I really liked, who had views that were completely the opposite of mine. I met a creationist down there called Kurt Wise, who I became extremely friendly with. A fascinating guy who'd studied under Stephen Jay Gould, but had kept his belief in creationism. Absolutely believes the world is 6,000 years old. And in talking to him, he told me this extraordinary story about how when he was 9 he wanted to commit suicide, and how he'd gone to church just before he was about to commit suicide and had discovered Jesus, and how that had literally saved his life. But he was also a fanatical student of science and had been collecting things since he was 5. And there was a period in his life where the two paths crossed, where his love of religion and his love of science seemed to be on a collision course. And so what he did was he bought a Bible, and he decided to chop out every single verse in the Bible that was in conflict with evolution or any of the other principles of science. And it took him 2 years. Every night he'd take a passage out, and at the end of the year he took the book and he opened it up, and the aim was to find a sort of a physical test of how much science undermined a literal interpretation of the Bible. And so he opened the Bible up and he lifted the pages up to see if he could lift it, if the thing would hold together with all the holes in it. And it wouldn't. And so he decided that he had to abandon science because God was more important to him. It saved his life. But he was devastated. And only by discovering creationism a few weeks later was he able to stitch together a life where he could have both of these things in his life that he loved. Well, when you meet someone like that, you realize that sometimes faith is an absolute necessity in a certain way. Then I met people who young Christians from Bryan College. I went on a cave trip with Kurt Wise, where we went on this horrendous, terrifying trip underground to look into this cave, which he was trying to explain how it was 6,000 years old. And I met these young Christians, and I really envied them too, because they were so happy and so calm. And I looked at my own life, which is the life of a sort of very busy, ambitious, greedy screenwriter. And it suddenly seemed, in contrast to theirs, to be almost ridiculous. And I wondered to myself, I mean, the conclusion of the book was I wondered to myself if there is a way to be a skeptic, and I now think of myself as an agnostic, to be a skeptic on the one hand, but get the benefits, the obvious and real benefits of faith. And so that is the answer to the question. As I had nothing to do as far as seeing the trial was concerned, I met a lot of people and came to understand the difference between myself and them, and to develop a respect for these people.
I'm wondering, as you're studying creationism now, if you haven't noted a change, and a change to what's called intelligent design, if in fact books like The Black Box aren't moving people who are creationists into kind of a compromise with evolutionists. And if in fact creationism now is kind of a smudge topic, because there's this merging, this blending that's taking place?
Well, I think that the whole issue of creation, it goes from an absolute sort of black and white interpretation of the Bible to a much broader one, which of course is what the Scopes trial was about. There are scientists who believe in intelligent design and that the world was, is 4,000 million years old, or 4,000 million years, whatever it is, and believe that behind it is a God who slowly put it together in that way. And that, of course, was the view of the Clarence Darrow side of the Scopes trial. But there are still, like Kurt, who is a highly intelligent man and highly trained in science, having studied under Stephen Jay Gould, who simply cannot escape from a literal interpretation of the Bible. They say that you can trace back that the Bible says that the earth started either between 6,000 and 8,000 years. And given that, it's very hard to come to any accord with the general scientific view of the development of the species and so on.
Do you ever just come to the conclusion that these men and women were able to so compartmentalize what seems an evident conflict, maybe like the rest was a little bit psychologically off the beam, like for instance the terrorists who live a middle-class life and then took planes over and ran them into the World Trade Center. Again, should one look for a psychological explanation when logic is so contradictory within the arguments of the presenter?
Well, I think that's a fascinating question, and one that, if I answer it truthfully, I think will offend a lot of people, which is, I think that nobody is really looking in any of this business with the Islam faith and how it has led to this horrible incident, which I was there for in New York and saw and experienced, which is whether one should look at faith in general as a potentially intellectually unsound and dangerous way of living. Of course, if one has faith in the most benign aspects of Christianity, there's no danger of doing anything terrible, but faith is the belief in something that can't be proved. And that has made this particular brand of Muslim extremely vulnerable to manipulation. And I think in a way, the idea that one should, and that it's normal, believe in things that have no evidence makes people credulous in all kinds of other ways. It opens the door to a kind of credulity that leads to, many other ludicrous beliefs, from racism to, electing presidents. You look at the evidence, you think you'd think that the system would somehow, our democratic system, which is a beautiful system and works extremely well in some ways, that if it worked on a sort of an evidentiary way, one would end up with better people at the top. And I'm not talking about Bush, who's doing a fine job in his own way, but I think there are all kinds of things. I remember when Bush said, when there was a big shooting in a church in Texas, and Bush's response to it was, this man is evil, and we must pray for less evil. As far as I'm concerned, that is completely useless. It doesn't, and what is evil? What has made this man evil? What is the effect of prayer? It doesn't actually solve the problem. In fact, it sort of hides the problem. And again, if you're going back to Clarence Darrow, if you look at the way Clarence Darrow was analyzing statements like that in 1925 and in his defense of Leopold and Loeb, this is one of the fascinating things about the Scopes trial. It was this extremely wonderful debate about these things that you and I are talking about now,